All right, greetings, friends. Welcome to another Wednesday at 11 program, and this is a good turnout. And what we've learned over and over doing this is we do it now, and then we put it on YouTube, and 500, 1,000, whatever people watch it later on. But it's good to have a live audience so we can interact and see each other, which is wonderful. If you don't know, my name is James Howell, and at first here I want to say something about Laura Hikus and Joy Plemons, who are up here with me, who want to say something about affordable housing. As you may know, this has been a big deal in the life of our church. When we raised funds to build this building, which is really spectacular, we committed $5 million to affordable housing here in the city of Charlotte. And a lot of this has come to fruition. You can drive through the Plato Park. We sent out an email the other day with photos and updates and all. It's just really, I'm so proud of you guys as a church to make that happen. So Laura and Joy have something they want to mention to you, and then we'll start the program.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Laura Hikus, and we have a summer Sunday school going on. And I figure if you're here, you're interested in affordable housing. So mark down June 15th, which is not this Sunday, but the next, because we're going to be talking about affordable housing and have Joe Hamby. And do you want to say something, Joy, about, she leads our affordable housing team.
Yes, and you're welcome to join. I would just say that everybody loves Joe, right? So he's going to be here and he's going to be entertaining. We're also going to have some activities for kids. If you want to come, we're going to plant some seeds so that we can share that with the community gardens at places like Habitat and QC Family Tree. So they'll be entertained. We're going to end up making some sandwiches for Roof of Up for that day. So as soon as we finish making them here, we'll take them over to the center where people will get to eat some great chicken salad sandwiches. So come, enjoy Joe's speech, and then, make a little sandwich.
And if you ever want to know more about how you can get involved after you hear how important it is, come find one of us.
All right. Thanks, you guys. It's my great privilege to introduce our special guest, Tom Hanchett. Tom is a longtime friend. Now he's a neighbor since we moved to Plaza Midwood. He's a crack musician, I have learned, but he's also a great historian and knows more about the history of Charlotte and a lot of things around the South than anybody that I know. Tom actually was, last time you were here as a program, we were in Jubilee Hall. This was right before COVID descended. And we did a program on what's beautiful about Charlotte. And Tom was up front with Mayor Harvey Gantt and Molly Grantham. And that was just a great evening. I just loved that so much. If you were here, you enjoyed it. And that's available on video as well. So Tom, welcome. Thank you for coming.
It is great to be here.
There you are. Let's, first of all, just a little bit of where are you from originally?
I'm from the South, kind of. My dad taught at Hollins College in Virginia in the mountains, and so I grew up partly in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but then he got a gig in upstate New York at a very rural area in the middle of upstate New York, and so I'm partly a New Yorker, but I don't talk like a New Yorker. And then both of them are from the Midwest. So if you ask me about Midwestern things, I go, yeah, sure. And I'm in the kitchen helping with the chairs when there's a party.
Welcome to the South. A great Hollins graduate, by the way, and trustee Kay Weatherspoon died recently here from our church. Great school. Anyhow. Tom's a historian. I want to start with just a philosophical question that we could spend the whole hour on, but we won't. Why does history, I worry that we're in an age where things like history doesn't matter. So let me ask, why does history matter, period?
Well, I think about that a lot because I'm a historian and I'm in Charlotte, which doesn't seem to have much history. Actually, it does, and that's one of the reasons it's been such a blessing to be here since about 1981. History is how we got here, and it changes all the time as we change. New folks coming into Charlotte, it changes Charlotte's history. People growing up in Charlotte changes Charlotte's history, and here changes also. During COVID, the kind of questions we were asking about the past changed. One of the things that I worked on in this book was a quick glimpse of the polio epidemic of the 1940s. And what it did was to shut down all of Charlotte. Sunday schools quit, church camps quit. Kids were not encouraged to go out of their home because of this mysterious disease. And, during COVID, all of a sudden that's very current. And so knowing about history helps us. If you figure out how you got here, it's easier to figure out where to go next. And I think that's kind of the bottom line for me.
And we see it on the ground, and it continues to impact relationships. I just think about things. I went to something years ago about why is 77 where it is? Why is Independence Boulevard where it is? Why did it not run through Myers Park? Why did it run through poor parts of town? It divided. So there are lingering relationships that are still impacted because of what happened in history. Tom has an earlier book. I have some copies over here. We have copies of his new book here, which you can pick up today. You can't just pick them up. You can purchase those, I should say. But he has an earlier book that's fabulous called Sorting Out the New South City, and it's sort of explaining how Charlotte got to be the way it is. You see it on the ground. We drive by it all the time. Things like Second Ward used to be a thriving Brooklyn neighborhood, and a lot of people have taken an interest in this lately, how it came to be. It's a sad story, the way it came to be. Greg Jarrell, who's a friend who has spoken at our church a number of times, has written a book about that called Our Trespasses, that one of our small groups, Lisa's got it right there in hand. There you are. Go group. They're called the Babs, but I won't tell you what Babs stands for in this setting. Ask them privately. Anyhow, and then we are very involved missionally with the Brook Hill neighborhood, which is sort of one of the last vestiges of what you call NOAH, N-O-A-H, naturally occurring affordable housing. Tom, talk some about why does the history of affordable housing matter? You've written a whole book on it. And then what really is affordable housing? I mean, some people think these are like street people, but it's all kinds of people who need what we would label as affordable housing.
Well, let me start with that, because as I'm giving talks about this, that's the first question is, so what is affordable housing? And I've got a two-part answer. Many of you probably know this already because there are folks here who are very deep into that, but there are probably people like me 5-6 years ago who don't have but a vague notion of this. One part of it is that your housing, rule of thumb, shouldn't cost you more than about 30% of your income. And when you talk about housing, you're talking about your rent or your house payment, but also your utilities, those things that allow you to have a roof over your head. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that it is kind of generally for folks who are making the area median income or less. Area median income. Why area median income? Well, cost of living is different in Charlotte than it is in New York. And so every community, there's a calculated area median income. As I got into that, I picked kind of two levels of area median income. One is 30% of AMI, and the other is 60% of AMI. You start looking at this, and you go, wait a minute, those are people that are around me all the time. And this fear or worry about affordable housing, will it come next to me? Well, those folks are part of your life every day. 30% of AMI, custodial workers, food service workers, child care workers, disabled people, seniors relying on Social Security. But also at 60% of AMI, that's teachers, nurses, nurse assistants, first responders, social workers.
Your associate pastors, your children's ministry, youth ministry staff. When I hire people, they think, oh, I want to live near the church. Nope. They can't live anywhere near the church.
And
Laura's nodding, yes.
That is,
Kirby's nodding.
It's a moving target. You may be surprised that for a family of 4 in Charlotte this year, the area median income is $100,000. Boy, that sounds like a lot of money. Because most of us, before inflation really took hold, that was, wow, making $100,000. I can remember when making $20,000 was my goal. But now, if you're at 60% of that, you're making $60,000 a year. Still sounds pretty good. Rent at 30% of income would be $1,500 a month. Okay, maybe I could find someplace like that in Charlotte. 30% of AMI, you could only afford about $750 a month rent. And that is almost impossible to find in this city. This is from 3 years ago now. Charlotte, Mecklenburg, rent 1% of apartments are under $1,000.
And that was 3 years ago.
Yeah. And so affordable housing is something that we need if we're going to have somebody care for us at the hospital, if our kids are going to have a teacher. All of those, CMS is thinking about this very seriously. Atrium is thinking about this very seriously. So it's not a them problem, it's an us problem.
And one of the things I think that I had to rethink after reading your book is that one of the things I think you say in here is that if you look at the history of affordable housing work in Charlotte, it's sort of a series of experiments. Like, let's try this, and we learn what works, what doesn't work, what was a mistake, and so on. So that history is valuable because sometimes somebody has an idea, we can say, yeah, we tried that in 1967, and that didn't go very well. And there are all kinds of factors, right? It's not just that we should go build places for people to live in. How codes and regulations matter so much. Anyhow, say more about that. What are some of the factors what have we learned over time?
The book has, I figured, there were 3 or 4 different stages in the journey from public housing in the 1930s and 40s up through scattered site housing. You may remember that. You're about the right age. I'm the right age to remember that program. And today, whatever's going on today, there's a lot of investment that you all have helped with, not only particularly through the church, but also through the bond issues that have come up about every 2 years. Most recent one in November, $100 million to help with affordable housing in Charlotte, which again sounds like a huge amount of money, but it's a drop in the bucket. And so I found that there are actually a number of different stages that we go through, and if we did a whole slideshow, I could talk about it. Let me start out though with non-subsidized affordable housing, because that's a really important bottom line. Non-subsidized affordable housing, this NOAA, naturally occurring. Now you have a different NOAA. You got a guy with a big boat. This is naturally occurring affordable housing. And if you go back in the early 20th century and before that, it was pretty much mixed into every neighborhood.
That's your street, Katie.
That's Thomas Avenue. I live just around the corner from this. And can you pick out the quadruplex? 4-unit apartment. On the left, it looks like a single-family house, but it's actually a duplex. And then in the middle are 2 single-family houses that by the time I moved to this neighborhood were rental housing, not particularly expensive. In fact, I was in a couple of bands where the bass player lived on Thomas Avenue, which is, that's the bottom of the pecking order if you're in music, particularly amateur music in a small town. And so that naturally occurring affordable housing had some good things about it. But for folks at the very bottom of the economic ladder, it wasn't so good. Absentee landlords would build rental housing. You can see the old Brooklyn neighborhood. You can see an African-American street with houses that have never been painted, all jammed together. That's black housing in Charlotte. If you take a look down below, those are folks at the Atherton Mill Village in Dilworth. And it's unpaved streets and no indoor plumbing. Indoor plumbing was not a requirement here in Charlotte until that polio epidemic in 1947. And so that's kind of the bottom line, is that we've always had mixed income housing. We're back to it now, but it's always been really hard to care for the most needy.
And we still have absentee ownership. So Greg Jarrell and some of the clergy and I have been working on some large complexes, especially some, say, in the Druid Hills area. These are buildings that are in decrepit condition. Codes are not in force, but then people who live there, it's either terrible for them to live there or they wind up being evicted. It's just a huge problem that's still ongoing today all over Charlotte.
So this is kind of a bottom line, and still today, all through our lives, most people who need low-income housing get it this way. In my life, I come out of college, I'm not making very much money, I get a couple, 3 roommates, and we go rent an old house in Elizabeth and then later on in Plaza Midwood. Those old houses have disappeared. As our real estate prices have been bid up in the last 15 years or so, there are almost no old houses in certainly my neighborhood or the adjacent Center City neighborhoods that fulfill that NOAA need. And so that's a kind of jumping to the present to look at kind of where we are now.
There are, when I read your book, I started lumping some things in categories, and there are three of them that I think about if I can remember to cycle us through them. One would be embarrassments, like dumb stuff that we've done as a people over time that we should be embarrassed about. The second is heroes. We have some people who have really done heroic stuff. And then I want to talk some about the church's role in all of this. So let's talk about what are some things that are just embarrassing. Something like redlining, but some other things that God, we just did this and it caused so much damage, and it was for greedy reasons, it was for racist reasons. What are the embarrassments?
Well, one is that lack of plumbing. That was called to Charlotte's attention when Camp Green was about to locate here in World War I. Charlotte had so many people using those pit toilets, the privies. Disease spread as flies and mosquitoes circulate. Imagine what happens in the winter when the water freezes. It's and so 19 teens, Charlotte didn't do anything about it. Cost too much. 1930s, women's clubs began organizing and saying, we need to invest in this. There's federal money coming in through the New Deal. Charlotte didn't do anything. And real estate investors particularly pushed back. It's socialism. People don't want it. We'll have to raise the prices. People will be out on the street, and it's almost Christmas. And it just again and again and again putting off indoor plumbing. And then the polio epidemic hit. And the polio epidemic, it took people a while to, you remember polio? Barely, because we're the vaccine generation. But it used to be that, when that thing struck kids, they were paralyzed, their growth stunted, living in an iron lung, all of that. And it was spread from human waste. And once that was figured out and the community shut down in 1947, the real estate interests said, this is a community issue. And they did a 180, which was really cool. They said, we're going to insist on a realtor's standard house ordinance. We're going to insist that there be window screens to keep the flies out. We're going to insist that every home have functioning indoor plumbing. It was many years before functioning indoor heat became part of the deal. But I was so bummed out as I read this, year after year after year after year, and then at the end, there's this switch. And people understood it was a community issue. And so that embarrassment gave way for me to hope in that respect.
Some of us, welcome to our Park Row Baptist clergy couple. Glad that you're here. A lot of us among the clergy who've been around Charlotte a long time have been working toward, I don't know what to call it, community will, right? That we are a community together. This is hard to pull off in a big city like Charlotte. And so you have the haves, and they have their haves, and they kind of blame people elsewhere who aren't haves, and they must have failed to do what they do in some way. Is it harder than ever to build community will around the community? It feels like it is. Do you think that is the case, historically speaking?
Right now, things are really weird in this United States, and as a historian, I can tell you that, but I have no idea where we really are as opposed to what we see in the media. But I am... In the book, I have two particular episodes, or maybe three, around that thing of how do you generate community will. And here in the late 2010s, you may remember the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, where a guy who was pretty much minding his own business was hauled out of his car and killed by police. And there's a long story there. And what I was interested in was the community response. And the community response was at one hand, anger by particularly black people who saw this as part of which it was, a national wave of incidents like that, but also as an expression of this persistent inequality. And what happens in Charlotte is a whole bunch of different people get energized. News media, Fred Klassen Kelly, Pam Kelly, other reporters at many different outlets here start to document these problems. And I thought I knew a bunch of stuff about this stuff in Charlotte, and they taught me things. That's why the book happened, was those stories, the power of story. But at the same time, churches got involved. The philanthropic efforts got involved. Foundation for the Carolinas put together a $50 million fund with groups in the community. And government, which had been somewhat energized, got more energized thanks to a hero that I didn't really understand, which is Vi Alexander Lyles. And Vi Alexander Lyles, I'm going to talk from my perspective, is a very quiet person compared to a lot of flamboyant mayors who are always out there and tooting their own horn. And she does that enough so that she gets elected. But I didn't understand that she had been an affordable housing advocate for her whole career. In fact, she comes from that in Columbia. Her family were black builders. The building trades were dominated by African Americans coming out of slavery times. And so she understood building and development and things like that. And when what's now Dream Key Partners, the nonprofit, was founded in Charlotte, she was the government liaison to that. We have a Charlotte Housing Trust Fund, which does not raise money to build a whole project, but it raises money to help with somebody who's got a project almost ready to go. She was the person who came up with that legislation around the year 2000. And so when the Keith Lamont Scott thing happened, she was on city council, and she sat down and drafted a memo, which everybody signed on to, that said, there's a lot of problems here, but we're going to focus on housing, and we are going to pass those bond issues. We're going to get stuff done. And so a lot of what we've seen in the past few years has been many people working together, inside government, outside government, and building thousands of units.
Let me insert two things. One is, back during the election, I did a thing on religion and politics here, and I pointed out, like if I were to endorse a candidate, people would get hysterical. I pointed out we're the only people who don't endorse candidates. The Roman Catholics endorse candidates. The white evangelicals endorse candidates. The black churches endorse so it's only the mainline Protestants who don't. I do wonder if there's a way that in the church we can think about Vi Lyles as a great example of a candidate, and that somebody's running. You probably know which party she's in, but it's not partisan, but that as Christians, we have commitments to things like inadequate housing being something that we've got to deal with. If you have a candidate who has a strong record for doing something about that, that might actually, it's not a party thing, it might actually be good cause for us to think that's somebody that we actually could get behind. And the second thing I want to insert, just because it made me so angry at the time, the Keith Lamont Scott thing, stories matter, but then how stories get told matter. So the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, there was a gathering, a demonstration, a protest downtown. I went. A lot of white people went. It was not purely black. A lot of white people were there. And then the march moved uptown, and there wound up being a little bit of rioting and a death. The way the story got pitched all over town was black protesters came, and then they became violent. That is such a racist, false picture of what happened. It just took a couple of people breaking some windows and doing something stupid, but then the story, it was so racist, the way the story got told, and it was totally false. It made me so angry at the time. You mentioned Vi Lyles. Let's talk about some other heroes where one person actually makes a difference. So just a couple of names that I would mention. You talk in the book about my longtime friend Paul Leonard, who's amazing. You talk a lot about John Crosland. I mentioned this actually in my sermon on Sunday. John Crosland did a lot of good in his life, but I was in a meeting that he had called just not long before he died. I don't know if you guys were there. And he had an idea. It was about a code thing, that if we just changed one code, we could do more about affordable housing. And in that session, I was sitting next to him. I said, John, why are you so passionate about this? And he wept and said, I've got to do something for the homeless before I die. It was really powerful. Talk about some of the heroes.
John Crosland was kind of a surprise. He's a real estate developer, was a real estate developer, and I'm biased. I watched those folks do things in neighborhoods that I cared about that I didn't like, and so I was not predisposed to see him as a hero. But actually, he was one of the major, if you don't know this name, he's one of the major home builders. There's a John Crosland 3 today. There's all sorts of Crosland-affiliated organizations in town that are doing interesting stuff. But he built subdivisions and talked about how they would be affordable for all. Well, they wouldn't really be affordable for all, but he was starting to think that way. And one of the turning points was Habitat for Humanity. He's the guy that got us doing Habitat for Humanity. Now, the person I should really credit as the person who really got it started was Julia Malden, who was on City Council, and I'm sorry, Board of Ed, School Board, there you are. But she and a number of other people got Crosland to know about this thing going on in Georgia, where church people were volunteering alongside folks who needed housing and building housing that they could afford. And he had a little private plane, and he put a bunch of people on the private plane. They went down to Georgia, came back, and Charlotte became, probably still is, the leading city in Habitat for Humanity. It helped that Paul Leonard was here. Paul Leonard was a Presbyterian minister, am I remembering correctly?
That's correct.
There you go.
Although I would add, in his elder life, he became a member of my Davidson United Methodist Church. Just, you upgrade over time.
But having this energy here, this is where Woman Built was started with Rosalind Carter, Jimmy Carter, one of the first places he ever came to Habitat. And so those kind of heroes are woven through this whole thing. In fact, can I talk about Fair Market Square for a moment?
I was going to bring it up, but we may, yes.
Okay. Well, let me tell you how we got to Fair Market Square. Fair Market Square is on the plaza, and it's a pretty cool place, much cooler than the first public housing. When people think about affordable housing, I think we still think of this. This is Charlotte's first two housing developments, public housing developments, part of the New Deal, segregated by race, but also set way apart out at the edge of town. On the left, Fairview Homes, near where Camp North End is, there was nothing out there. And Piedmont Courts, which was the white neighborhood, you can see how many hundreds and hundreds of units. There's no church nearby. There's no, you can't walk to anything. You can't walk to your job. And it was better than the existing ultra-low income housing because it had indoor plumbing and it had roofs that would actually keep the weather out. And so this is the beginning of subsidized housing. And then there's a whole bunch of things where investors get involved in that. And then there's this scattered site movement in the 1970s and 80s where Charlotte was one of the national leaders. And the idea behind scattered site is instead of building a huge thing out at the edge of town, what if you built like a 50-unit, and that was the max, 50-unit apartment complex, looks like every other apartment complex, drop it into vacant lots everywhere in town. And you're looking at Gladedale on Providence Road. If you all are new to Charlotte, Providence Road is pretty prosperous. And dang, right there where Old Providence Road split off, there is affordable housing. And if you look at the map here, and you know Charlotte has this wedge of wealth extending southward, you can see that a lot of those units were in the southern part of the city. And so, wow, that was a cool thing. In the 80s, the financing possibilities changed. There was something called the low-income housing tax credit, which we'll come to in a minute. But this is the first low-income housing tax credit project in Charlotte. That is a drone photo by y'all's artist and community member here, Albert Doolin. Many of you know Albert Doolin. And Fair Market Square has all sorts of interesting stories, but Pastor Howell can tell at least one or two of them.
I just was, every book I've published, when it comes out, somebody reads it and they call me and they say, you know, on page 47, you should have said, like, oh, thanks, it's too late. So Fair Market Square was adjacent to the church that I pastored at the time that it opened, Plaza United Methodist Church. And when the idea that this was going to be put in that neighborhood arose, there was a huge ruckus. People like, we've had enough of that kind of stuff. We have enough issues to deal with. We cannot have this. John Crosland came, other people came, met with us, had very helpful conversations. There was still a huge neighborhood pushback. And I just mentioned this because in your book, not faulting you, Tom, but it says, when Fair Market Square opened, adjoining residents welcomed the tenants with a get-acquainted reception featuring brownies, cakes, casseroles, and goodwill. I would amend that to say that the members of Plaza United Methodist Church, I've never been prouder of them, they met and said, everybody in this neighborhood is against this development. They're just people coming there. We're going to go give them housewarming gifts. And they did that, and I was so proud of them. Although a funny thing happened. There was a photo on the front page of The Observer of, I think Lisa was there with one of our infants at the time, delivering a gift to a woman that later was named as an attractive young woman, and sure enough, she had a guy that harassed her for about a year or so. No good deed goes unpunished. But it's the kind of thing, churches can make a difference with these things if we get behind it in the right way.
So that mixture is the beginning of where we are today, where, and we'll talk about this later on, where mixing subsidized housing into potentially every neighborhood.
And I'd point out our affordable housing projects related to this Hope is Here campaign. One, this is no small deal. One is in Elizabeth at the Caldwell Church, and one is on Park Road, the YWCA project. That wasn't going on years ago, but now it is, and we're part of that.
And the places where folks have done that, it's been very, very popular. This is South Park Mall. Y'all know Nordstrom's and all of that. If you are at Nordstrom's, you're just across the street from a development, Ashley Square by Dream Key Partners, the nonprofit here in Charlotte. It's right behind the Whole Foods, that little street there. Ashley Park Lane is brand new. The adjacent buildings all developed to look onto that, and it's a co-development with Inlivian, the Charlotte Housing Authority. And there had been a small scattered site project there. It was torn down. More housing units, low-income housing units mixed in with market rate apartments on Ashley Lane. And then just behind the main building, you can see the senior apartments. And does this harm property values in South Park? I don't think so. And so that kind of mixture is something that is in many parts of our city, but we're busy driving to work, and so we often don't see it. And it's often so good that, wow, really? There's low-income housing here? That's Bright Walk, about a mile out of downtown on Statesville Avenue. You see single-family homes. You see multifamily affordable housing. Wow. And we could do that in every neighborhood if we wanted to.
Let's talk some about the church and its history and affordable housing. I think my wife's ears perked up when you mentioned people getting on the plane with John Crosland to go down to Georgia. In your book on page 152, a group of ministers, each joined by a lay leader in their congregation, visited Millard Fuller in Georgia in 1981. John Crosland offered the use of his company's Beechcraft jet for the trip. They returned with the inspiration, and Habitat was formed. If I'm not mistaken, one of those pastors was the senior pastor of Myers Park United Methodist Church, who would be Lisa's dad, although I wish I could go ask him that now. His memory wasn't that great toward the end. We're at the 100th anniversary of our church this year, and I think you're going to come back in the fall and help us think about that. It's a cool thing in the history of our church, and it's not a nostalgia thing. To me, part of the role of history is to say, historically, our church did this kind of stuff, and that informs what we're being called to do as we move in the future. So Tom, talk some about churches, the role that they played, the role that they could play in this.
That's something that you've probably thought more about than I have. But the thing that's going on, particularly since the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, is a sense that this is something that churches can do. There are older precedents here in Black Charlotte. If you know the United House of Prayer for All People, major denomination that's headquartered in D.C. but has a tremendous strength here, for a number of years they have developed senior housing out of their own pocket. In First Ward, there is a development called Grace Emmanuel Homes, named after their founding bishop. If you go out Beatties Ford Road near the mother house of the United House of Prayer for All People, there's a former motel on the right, hotel that is now senior housing. And there's also Bishop Madison Homes, which was just in the paper yesterday, and I didn't read the article to find out whether it's in honor of the church's history or whether it's by the church. So this is not weird. But what's happened in the last few years is that a lot of churches have said, okay, you know, our congregation is shrinking, our land is abundant, we are not going to build more buildings for the church. What if we use some of that land to build affordable housing? There's a woman in Charlotte who was started with Crosland Dion Nelson, who's doing this across the region in partnership with churches. Her group is called Laurel Street. One of the groups that she's worked with, I believe, is the Presbyterian Church near Novant Presbyterian Hospital, Caldwell Presbyterian, Reverend John Cleghorn. And he's got a whole book out called Building Belonging about churches doing this across the United States. Black churches, white churches, all sorts of backgrounds. And if we are to care for the least of these, that's a powerful way to do it.
Yeah, and I tell you often, we're an outlier as United Methodist Church, and that we're growing, we're getting younger, and so on. You know, there are a lot of little churches around the city that are just dwindling next to nothing. And one of the things that we're doing with those properties is using some of it to develop affordable housing. So we're certainly proud of that. Another cool thing, I think, that comes in the book, you did this one right out. Sometimes just reality checks are helpful to people. So you have the following two sentences early in your book. I don't know who you thought the readers were, but you said, you, it'd be everybody in this room, live in subsidized housing. You do. Actual subsidized dollars mostly go to rich people. Say more about that.
In the beginning of the book, I talk about 6 myths, and we've talked a little bit about them today. The notion that public housing still looks like what you see there, that's one of them. Two hard truths, and two surprising ironies. Got to read my own book, doggone it. One is that all of these programs, Section 8, which is a rental supplement that goes to landlords so that people of low income can live pretty much anywhere because the landlord gets fully compensated between the tenant's rent and then the Section 8 subsidy, housing choice vouchers, another name for them, or the low-income housing tax credit, which is a tax shelter. They sell the credits to investors, corporations that are looking for a break on their tax. And so that surprised me, is almost all of the supplements indeed benefit low-income people, but the people who actually get the supplement are well-to-do folks. And I wrote that, and then I kind of looked around because I was sitting right next to me, And sometimes when I'm writing about them, I'm actually writing about me. And this was one of those cases because I'm a homeowner, and you get the mortgage interest deduction every year. And I went and looked on my friend Google, who knows everything, and the mortgage interest deduction, what it costs the feds, is 5 times what they put into housing subsidies for low-income folks. So if you're a homeowner, you're getting that tax break. And there's stuff besides that. I wrote an essay in a book many years ago called The Other Subsidized Housing, and kind of totaled up all the different ways that the federal government helps with suburban sprawl. And one is building water mains. We would not have all the housing we have in North Mecklenburg if it was just the market at work. I can remember in the 1980s when the federal government, to help rural development, underwrote trunk sewer and water lines into North Mecklenburg. And bam, that area developed. And so when we're thinking about this affordable housing, subsidized housing, it's not just them, it's also us.
What else would you like to share before? I'm going to open it up and see if these folks have some questions.
Yeah.
So
Cool. Let's see, what do I have here? Let me do the low-income housing tax credit thing. So, going to talk about financing for a moment. Don't go to sleep on me. If you need to, go ahead and wake up later for the questions. But there are 2 main ways that low-income housing happens today. There's some public housing still, but to my amazement, there is a cap on the amount of public housing there can be in the United States. That cap was put in place by a North Carolina senator, Locke Faircloth, in 1998. Our population has grown, our need has grown, but public housing is not growing. We could change that, but that's where we are. Instead, during the Reagan era, under President Reagan, 2 market-based ways of subsidizing housing. One is the housing choice vouchers, the Section 8. Family gets a voucher, they can go out and shop within the area, and the difference between the amount a person can afford to pay and the rent he must pay is that voucher. The problem with it is that a lot of landlords won't accept them. And that's particularly true in the wedge of wealth here in Charlotte. The other thing, if you want to build new apartments, you get this tax shelter deal called the low-income housing tax credit. And again, there's just not enough for the need. Here in Charlotte, there are a bunch of projects that have been put together at the expense of local real estate interests, and there's just not enough stuff coming down from the feds. And so this is where we are, and then there's a possibility that we may be someplace else. I'm watching the headlines on a whole bunch of things, but the president's big, beautiful budget bill, the early drafts of it promise to sharply curtail vouchers, like a 40% cut in Section 8, if I'm reading correctly. Will that happen? I don't know. On the other side of the ledger, to my amazement, something called the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, proposed by more than 100 folks on both sides of the aisle. And pieces of this look like they may get into the bill, but basically it's to expand the low-income housing tax credits. So the history continues to unfold.
wow, interesting. Okay. I'd like you to have the chance to ask Tom a question or two. And if you've been with me, you know my rule of thumb is don't stand up and make a speech. Just ask a question. Yes.
Hospitals are really cognizant of this. I do regular talks thanks to, there's Diane English, who founded Community Building Initiative, and she got us fixed up with the hospitals on a regular basis. We talk to administrators, we talk to new doctors, and recently I had a human relations person from Atrium who said, I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. We are an expanding entity, you know, across the eastern United States. I can't remember the exact thing, but I have to hire 25,000 nurses and nurse assistants in the next 3 years. I have no idea where they're going to live, because at the going rate for paying nurses and nurse assistants, they can't live in Charlotte. And so Atrium is building a little bit of affordable housing. CMS is working with a developer to build a little bit of affordable housing. And so that's, yeah. We need to do a lot more.
Well, because I tore down every small house right off Elizabeth Avenue.
Yeah.
When I lived in Grove.
Yeah.
I ran the construction for them, and they haven't yet to do anything about it. They're talking about a large hospital,
Yeah.
and they were supposed to do this and do that. There's just nothing there now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolute waste.
Yeah. The area around Elizabeth Avenue was one of the areas I looked at when I came here as a college student because it had lots of naturally occurring affordable housing. It has 0 naturally occurring affordable housing currently. Hundreds of units demolished. Nothing happened.
Another question. Rick.
Do you see the proliferation of VRBO, Airbnb, having any impact on availability?
There's a lot of things taking housing out of the affordable market, and one is the Airbnb thing where you can rent out that old house or that old garage apartment and make hundreds of dollars a weekend. Dang. Why not do that? Well, one of the reasons is it's taking housing out of the market of people who live here and need to live here. Same thing with corporate ownership of large numbers of apartment complexes, single-family homes. Central Avenue used to be all naturally occurring affordable housing. And the developers came in, bought them up, and put in granite countertops and doubled the rent. And it's almost impossible to find affordable housing on Central Avenue. It's where I live, so that's what I know close up. But there's a lot of things pulling away from the way it used to be.
Did any of your research touch on bankruptcy exemptions and looking at how that affects?
And yell for the old deaf guy.
Yeah, did any of your research touch on bankruptcy exemptions or the state court exemptions for creditors when you were trying to look at this? I mean, did that
Cool. I will be the first to admit that this is bigger than I could get my arms around, and it's actually bigger than anybody can. I'm looking particularly at rental housing, multifamily housing. There's all, Habitat is homeowners, all of this. I have no idea what you're talking about. Talk a little bit more.
Shelley,
Seriously.
do you know something about that?
Seriously, yeah.
Well, right now in North Carolina, if you need to file bankruptcy, which is often for medical debt or whatever may happen in life, the maximum for a couple is $70,000 in exemptions, unless you happen to be old. And for an individual, it's $35,000. So it's, housing prices they just don't work for that because even if
Wow.
your mortgage is tiny, the value of your house is going way up.
Yeah.
Affects your ability to file or whether you keep your house.
Wow. If you want to write down just a couple of words about that and your name and email, yes, cool.
What else?
If you had some land on your church's property and you were thinking about,
A big hypothetical. Asking for a friend.
if you were thinking about, we need to do something in a big vision for our church for affordable housing, is it better to use that strip of land to build 5 to 10 places for people to rent, or 3 or 4 places for people to own? Or do you build something that is a center that is kind of a wraparound service for, say, a place at the YWCA where 80 units are going in of affordable housing already? What gives the most impact for a small church with a little bit of space? How do you recommend those churches use that space to fulfill the issue of or address it?
You are asking
and
exactly the right questions.
And if you don't
which
know,
I
that's
cannot answer.
that's the Reverend Amy Jacks Dean of Park Road Baptist Church.
Yeah. What the YWCA is doing just down the street from y'all is really impressive. They've thought through this a lot. So talking to Kirsten Sickley, who some of you know, talking to Fred Dodson over at Dream Key Partners. They do a lot of this, talking to Dion Nelson, who works with churches all the time. I think that don't be scared of getting it wrong, because you won't get it wrong. Doing something is way better than allowing the ball just to keep bouncing down the street.
Talk a bit, Tom, about Brook Hill, a neighborhood where we've been involved for, 25 years now.
Brook Hill is what got me into this. If you don't know Brook Hill, you go down South Tryon Street and to the area that's now known as Loso, and there are all these apartment complexes and multi-story and breweries and a lot of breweries and a bunch of breweries as well. And then there's this big vacant area, and out at the end of it, you can see these one-story look-alike houses with asbestos shingle siding on the side of them. And you go, well, what is that? Well, that was privately developed low-income housing. Huh? It was one of the surprises that got me into this. There have been a whole bunch of programs going back to 1950 that kind of foreshadow this low-income housing tax credit. In 1950, the federal government, looking at veterans coming back in particular, said, we got to build housing, we got to build housing. And so they did a loan program to local developers who could build lots of housing. And if you staged it right, you didn't really have to pay back the loan yourself. The rents would pay it back. And a whole bunch of people got very well-to-do around that, all across the United States. Marsh, Spangler, people like that benefited from that. And they did what they were supposed to do, which is build a lot of housing. C.D. Spangler figured out that he could, because they guaranteed a certain profit percentage, that he could put the money into low-income housing as easily as he could put it into upper-income housing. Initially, they built a lot of upper-income housing. Scotland Colony, some of you know that. Sedgefield Apartments down near Park Road Shopping Center. Those are upscale, subsidized housing. Brook Hill was for black families and was much more low-income. There was also an area called Tryon Hills, which is low-income white. And that was kind of cool, because all of a sudden, there's all these houses with townhouse units with indoor plumbing and good roofs, and the government has not put up a huge amount of money at it. And in the short term, that was pretty cool. But in the long term, because it wasn't publicly owned, all sorts of people got involved in making money off of it. And the Spangler family continued to own the land, but they sold off the development rights, which were temporary because it was on a 100-year, and all of this is just, but what it meant was that the people who lived there had very little power. And Lisa Howell knows this much better than I do. But as the desire for profit overwhelmed Brook Hill Village, putting together alternatives for those people, with those people, always kind of trickled away. And it may happen yet, but it is a great example of the fact that just because the private market's involved, you don't automatically get good stuff, any more than just because the government's involved, you don't automatically get good stuff. Lisa, you want to add a little bit about Brook Hill?
And for those of you who haven't been over there, we do partner with South Tryon Community United Methodist Church adjacent to Brook Hill, and that church has been involved there forever. And you're welcome to worship at 11 on Sundays after you come here.
I'd make an observation that's dangerous. Tom, another thing we're doing as a church right now is we're reading these New Testament books of Luke and Acts together. If you're reading Acts, one of the things you find there is there's a lot of attention to what the early Christians did about their property, their possessions, their wealth. And there was a high commitment to share their possessions and wealth, not just with each other, but with total strangers who were in need, right? There's an inevitable collision between that kind of Christian ideal, that community and equality and opportunity for all, that's the ultimate good. There's a collision between that and the way capitalism just plays itself out. That's just the reality of things. People want to think if capitalism is let loose, all boats will rise, but all boats do not rise. And then we wind up with a divided culture. So that's something to ponder another day theologically, and for me to get in really deep trouble with some folks. So another question. Rick, you had one.
It was a good one. Do it again. Do it again.
So we talked a lot about housing designed for people at maybe 30% or 60% of the median income. What about the people who have 0%? Have you seen models that you regard as successful there? Does your book address that at all? And I'm thinking of the roof above transitional housing, things like that.
Indeed, that is part of the continuum here. It's not something that I spend a lot of time on. I'm really encouraged by the supportive housing efforts here. More Place, if you don't know about More Place, it's something that I take people on the CBI bus tour in particular.
We had big funding for More Place when it went up.
And it's for folks who are, well, they don't have exactly zero income because there are supplements to your income and your health and things like that. They're pitiful, but they're there. But having people not sleeping out on the street, but sleeping with a roof over their head, turns out to decrease all sorts of other problems that we pay for. I talk often to people who are in the emergency rooms here in Charlotte. That's part of the CBI tours. And something like 60% of their clientele, which we pay for at Atrium in particular, municipal hospital, 60% are people who are unhoused and are repeat visitors. They come because they need help on a regular basis. And so putting money into something like More Place where, okay, you're a little bit wiggy. I would be if I was sleeping out on the street day after day. You got substance abuse problems, whatever it is, let's get you housed and figure out, have a social worker assigned to you. Be able to get a prescription that you don't lose because you have to leave your home under the bridge because the sheriff just came. And so that kind of approach is very important.
So we have some of Tom's books over here. I'd say pick one up and leave money behind. There's a little sign telling you how to do that. We have our program on June 15th at 9:45 here in Francis. I was close. I had the right church in Francis Chapel. And then, Tom, just thank you so much for your work and your commitment to all of this and your book, but also for being with us, being a friend of our church. We're so grateful.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.